West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy with Chef Justice Putnam. Netrootsradio.com.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma fleur sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte.
The world's eyes are understandably on Ukraine, and we turn now to a very special guest for that region, the career diplomat Marie Yovanovitch, who served in the State Department for over 3 decades. That means, of course, across presidents in both parties. President Obama first named her ambassador to Ukraine in 2016, where she remained in that post until President Trump ousted her in 2019. But it was after a sordid smear campaign led by Rudy Giuliani, who was asserting that she was a problem in protecting what was basically the integrity of U.S. foreign policy and not allowing a tit-for-tat quid pro quo investigation of the Bidens. Trump also disparaged her in that infamous call with Zelensky, saying she was bad news and would go through some things, a dark warning about someone who was a servant, a public servant and his own employee. She was a star witness in Donald Trump's impeachment.
I do not understand Mr. Giuliani's motives for attacking me, nor can I offer an opinion on whether he believed the allegations he spread about me. Clearly, no one at the State Department did. The State Department is being hollowed out from within at a competitive and complex time on the world stage. This is not a time to undercut our diplomats.
Former U.S. Ambassador to Ukraine, Marie Yovanovitch, joins me now. She also has a book out, Lessons from the Edge. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. I've been reading what you have been writing and saying. One thing that jumps right out, because you know this region so well, this is your business, this is your expertise. You said that you would have expected this Russian military to be more, quote, competent in its opening invasion. Tell me about that and what you see here as its lackluster performance, even amidst, of course, some great tragedies.
Yeah, so back when I was in government, we would always remind ourselves that the Russians aren't 10 feet tall, that, you know, this is, if it ever came to that, this is an adversary that that could be dealt with. And I think that's what we're seeing on the ground in Ukraine, somewhat. But it is somewhat surprising how lackluster the Russian military performance has been. And I would have expected more from them.
Why do you think they are struggling? Is it the endemic corruption and other issues across Russia writ large, which the military may not be exempt from? Is it the nature of this particular conflict, which relates to sort of the ephemeral issues, morale and what they're being asked to do, including against some Russian-speaking individuals? Something else? What do you see as accounting for it?
Well, I think it's all of the above. I mean, there is a Soviet/Russian model of war. And I think what we're seeing is that they have never fully modernized, never fully reformed. They don't have an NCO corps. And so you have generals in battle, apparently, who are being killed. And you have a military that is uninformed, unskilled, and not motivated, as you noted. So I think there's that combination. And then I think what we're also seeing is the effects of corrosive corruption over many decades, where you think the military supply chain is providing certain equipment, but it's actually going into the pockets of generals and others. And so all of that weakens the military effort. And then I think the Russian military and Vladimir Putin himself completely underestimated the Ukrainians. Their view is that Ukrainians don't exist as a people, that there is no right to a separate country. And I think they thought that they were going to be greeted as liberators, that it would be a fast, quick war, and it would be very positive for the Russians. And what they found is massive resistance. They found that the comedian that perhaps they have underestimated all along, and including when he became president, that he is a wartime president and is uniting the country and strengthening and inspiring the Ukrainian people and the world. So I think there are a number of miscalculations that the Russians made, and the last serious miscalculation is they underestimated the international will and resolve of the United States and the allies and partners that I think President Biden has done a great job of bringing together.
Well, it's very interesting the way you walk us through those interconnected factors, Ambassador, and specifically the possible misperceptions of Russian elites and Putin helps people perhaps understand what's going on, because it almost looks irrational, although we have many ways to track exactly what motivates these leaders, but irrational to pick a war of choice, to do this invasion. But as you've just explained in part, that's because they rationally, based on different expectations and evidence, thought this would go better. Now they're here in the soup, in the thick of this. With regard to the sanctions, again, you are an advocate of diplomacy, of soft power, of ways to constrain the bad guys, if you will, but not always doing that by starting a war. What is your specific assessment of this broad sanctions policy, Europe and U.S.? We heard from a current State Department official earlier tonight, your former, but what's your assessment of this sanctions regime? Where do you think it ranks in terms of more or less effective of global efforts we've seen in the last several decades?
I thought that Ned Price's summary was excellent. And frankly, I've never seen anything like this as a sanctions regime, certainly not against a country like Russia. And I've been very impressed. We were promised that if Russia would invade, that there would be severe sanctions. And I think that's what Russia is getting. And I think it is painful. And my heart, goes out to the Russian people, who are the ones that are paying the price for this huge miscalculation, these war crimes. But I think somehow we need to make it clear to Vladimir Putin that this time he is not going to get away with this. He got away with it in Georgia. He got in 2008. He got away with it the first time he invaded Ukraine in 2014. He cannot succeed this time.
Yeah, and you're ticking off that history that you know so well from doing this work. It may have been to many Americans and even people in Europe not front burner. Because it didn't have the global cataclysm that we've seen now. I also want to play a little bit of your moment there in the impeachment. We've been talking foreign policy in your book, but here's some of what you said about diplomats in a situation that I can only imagine you never thought your public service career would take you into, which was being this witness and target in a question of whether the then president should have been removed from office for abuse of power, among other offenses. Let's take a look.
As foreign service professionals are being denigrated and undermined, the institution is also being degraded. This will soon cause real harm if it hasn't already. If we lose our edge, the U.S. will inevitably have to use other tools, even more than it does today. And those other tools are blunter, more expensive, and not universally effective.
From what I can tell, fact check true. I don't want to drag you too far into the past. You lived through it. You've written about it. People know about it. But with regard to the present, Ambassador, is it your view that President Trump's foreign policy and attitude and posture towards Putin and Russia emboldened Putin further? And given your extensive experience, how do you compare the current administration's Russia policy to Trump's?
I think that Vladimir Putin, the first thing I want to say is that official U.S. foreign policy towards Ukraine was very strong in the Trump administration. It was basically a continuation of the Obama policy. So it was strong, but it was clear that President Trump had his own personal views about Ukraine, and that became very public in the summer of 2019 with the release of the Perfect Call transcript, where he was using Ukraine as a pawn for his own personal and political gain. I think that sends a signal to autocrats like Putin that this is not a president who is working on behalf of the American people. This is a president who is using his office for personal gain. So one can make accommodations. And so, Putin got that message loud and clear. And I think he thought Ukraine policy would be in the right place. All he needed to do was keep the war in the East on like a low simmer rather than the boil that we're seeing now.
Yeah.
And I think the other part of it is that President Trump had very strong and negative views about NATO. And we've heard from a number of previous administration officials around President Trump that had he been elected president, reelected as president, he probably would have pulled us out of NATO.
Which is hard to even fathom.
There's no
right
need
now.
for Vladimir Putin to...
Yeah,
hard to believe.
Well,
but there's no need for Putin...
Before I lose you, that's the last thing I wanted to get you on, which is kind of the trickiest question, but take it all in and you say, okay, if that's true, and it sounds true, and Putin was emboldened, and he had this attitude from this friendlier, warmer president, do you know why he didn't try to go in and do this long-standing goal in Ukraine earlier, while Trump was president?
I think he was getting what he needed. I think he was getting what he needed from Trump, and so he didn't need to escalate into a war. But then, Zelensky was elected president. I think Putin thought that he could manipulate Zelensky. He was sorely disappointed there. Then Trump lost. Biden came into office clearly with a different worldview, one that is all about diplomacy and partnerships with allies and other partners. And he understood the importance of Ukraine. And I think, Putin looked around and he has a view towards his own legacy and an obsession with Ukraine. So I think that was one part of it. But I think the other part of it also is looking to his future. He was hoping to shore up his own popularity standings for the 2024 presidential elections. So I think there's a combination of many different things that are at work here.
It is Thursday, the 17th of March of 2022, and you are in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. I am your chef de cuisine, Justice Putnam. Gunner the English Bulldog is our snoozing sous chef, and our daily special is Metro Shrimp and Grits Thursdays, a little bit of jambalaya, a little bit of spice in your life. Well, amongst the tragedy of women, children, old people, well, just anybody, but I'm particularly struck by the images of dead babies and toddlers and grade school kids and high school kids littering the streets of Ukraine. That is a tragedy beyond compare. And in the midst of it, then we get, I guess, a little bit of, comedy from Marjorie Taylor Greene, who insists that, Bill Kristol, of all people, should go to his commander and chief himself. Or as she put it, and chief yourself. You would think that there would have been some sort of exam that one had to take about the basics of American United States government before being allowed to represent the people of the United States of America. Whether you were voted in or not, there should be some sort of entrance exam at least. Or there should be some sort of prerequisite of knowledge before you can even file to become a candidate. That would be helpful. But we have a bunch of idiots, and that was by design. We have Koch Industries continuing their fascist attempts to change the world in whatever image they believe is the good one. Continuing work in Russia, apparently doing Vlad's work for him as well. Spread the propaganda. You gotta, pump up the propaganda. Some 70 million people here are brainwashed, thinking that Donald Trump won the election. Is it any wonder that the nation of Russia would be more brainwashed when they have even more of a lockdown on their media and the free flow of information and ideas? Hermit Kingdom. We hear that a lot. I mentioned that yesterday, didn't I? This is the behavior of a hermit kingdom. But I got to tell you, well, I don't know. I was just going to say, you could probably fear the Russians a lot more, or Vlad a lot more than North Korea and Kim Jong-un. And then I thought, well, maybe not. Maybe it's about equal. Maybe. I think that our PSYOPs operations, which really consists of, I don't know, Radio Free Europe, PSYOPs here. Read a newspaper. You're using PSYOPs. Yeah, I'm hearing that from Putin apologists here in the United States. And on the West Coast, too, because there's a lot of them. We have the F. Biden flags, and they have the UCK also. Strategically placed so the little kids can see them on their walk or their bus ride to the elementary school in town. Do the city fathers and gals, city fathers and mothers, have they approached this person to say, hey, don't you think this crass display needs to be reined in a little bit? No, they don't. It's all free speech. Yeah, is it? Is it really free speech, or do you just allow vigilante justice to clamp down on those who might have a countervailing view? And if they had a public display of anything, the city fathers wouldn't need to come to tell that person to take it down because their house would probably be firebombed. Their tires might be slashed. I don't think their house would be firebombed, but I wouldn't put it above them. Because, as Zelensky said yesterday, we are already in World War III, and we have fifth columnists working actively in this country right at this very moment, and we need to be aware. Are we brave enough to call it out on the local level? On the other hand, that stasi quo, turn it on your neighbor, is not necessarily a good thing either, because false accusations can fly. Oh, you're a Putin apologist, when there probably aren't. But it can be used for devastating effect on the local level with its gossip and its petty retributions. Small town America is having an epiphany now. Except for the ones who are totally tied to Fox. They're not going to have OAN anymore. That's good. OAN had quite a big footprint here in Southern Oregon, and I always wondered why. I'm being rhetorical. I know exactly why. When Vladimir Putin and his people in the Kremlin and the FSB, they all huddled together and said, what demographic in America would be most susceptible to our brainwashing techniques? Well, let's go to sundown town America. They have some grievances, don't they? White men and women who have had their rights taken away. And what are the rights that they've had taken away from them? Being able to enslave another person to work for them. Do you think Vladimir Putin wants to stop it going to the Soviet Union? He's already talked about being a czar, Peter the Great. We're talking about a country who enslaved a vast population. Oh, yeah, I know, they called them serfs. Ukraine stood against that enslavement of people. Is it any wonder that a slave owner of a mindset of a slave owner like Putin would look upon the Ukrainian people as being equals? Of course he's calling them subhuman. They're only 3/5 of a person. And now, in his rambling rant, I just love the patronizing use of fake, hoax, cancel. The West is trying to cancel Russia. Wah, wah, wah. Look, you cancel yourself, mofo. You can lie to your people, but there's going to be an Alexander Solzhenitsyn, who I got to say is no liberal. Okay, let's be clear. Jesus. Yeah. For, every Alexander Solzhenitsyn, there's tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people of like-mindedness who are not quite able to express themselves as well. For every one of those, I got to say, that news producer is pretty hot. But, I'm a guy. We do that stuff every now and then. We fall into, some sort of, reductionist behavior. I apologize. But she's still hot. And sometimes that can protect you. But in Russia, no, they're going to beat the crap out of her when they get the chance. But as I was mentioning, for every one of those pretty news producers who publicly display on the number one news channel, the number one propaganda news channel with the number one propaganda news presenter, there's hundreds of thousands that think and believe just as her or just as she, but who are not quite able to express themselves, or I don't want to call it brave, because when you got a little kid you got to take care of and you're thinking, who's going to take care of him? That's going to temper some of your behavior. It doesn't have to temper your beliefs. So for every one of those news producers, hundreds of thousands of people who believe in what she, as she. Apparently, there's been scores of propaganda news presenters and producers and whatnot who have quit since she did her demonstration. Also read that Vlad is so afraid of being poisoned that he replaced 1,000 of his personal staff. You have a staff of 1,000? Give me a break. And that was only 1,000, because how many more thousands of servants does he have? My God. A man of the people. Well, the poorly educated can be manipulated, and that's been proven over there and over here as well. How do we educate our masses? It takes a long time, and part of it starts in school. Everybody's whining in the South and elsewhere, all these whining, book-burning types. Critical race theory is going to indoctrinate my kid. Well, how about learning about race in the context of civics? Because that's exactly where they should be learning it. You idiot. Is it any wonder they stopped teaching civics in the schools? Is it any wonder that they stopped having exams where back in my day, I'm sure you folks remember it too, because it's your day as well, back in the day. I remember you couldn't get past 8th grade unless you passed the civics test, the test on the Constitution, and it was really simple. In Germany, they divide your educational track right about junior high, whether you go onto a university track or you go into a vocational track. And I got to say, the vocational track is not devoid of the humanities. They still teach the humanities to those who are going to be machinists. But a lot of that has to do with, your grades and a test that you were administered around 8th grade. Is that draconian? I don't know. I just don't know. It seems to work. They made the display of Nazi symbols a crime, and we put up with it. And look what happens. Synagogues get blown up. Jews get shot coming out of a fire of a synagogue. Racist Nazis go into a synagogue and blast the place. Sikhs are mistaken for Arabs, and they get killed. As if it's okay to put a bounty on someone from the Middle East. Doesn't matter what strain of Asian you are, you're going to be subject to ridicule and sometimes death at the hands of a pummeling fist. At the hands of a pummeling fist? Is it because it's being reported more? It's come to light more? Has this always gone on, or is there truly an uptick in this? I think there's truly an uptick. Or might we say we're getting back to the old normal? How do we stop it? I'll tell you. I mentioned it already. We got to start teaching people. And it starts with the kids. Maybe our own. Though I don't think that we are the problem, are we? No. But we got to push for legislation that expands education, not restricts it. Education is not a for-profit endeavor. It's part of the public good, so therefore part of the public commons. Herein idiots like Manchin with the idea of free education, they're going to turn into slackers. Well, tell all those GIs that came back from the war or had the GI Bill. Were they slackers? I think your dad was one of them, Joe. Maybe not. You know, he doesn't mention anything about his free education. He doesn't mention anything about his daughter gouging people with the EpiPen. I wonder why. He's going to vote against Ketanji Jackson. Because of her climate views, probably. Jesus. Okay, as I mentioned yesterday in terms of Joe Manchin, I think I figured out how we can deal with Joe Manchin. Just tell him that we promise not to use any of these technologies to save the earth from climate change. We promise. Can we have this appropriation now, please? Can we have this nominee passed, please? We promise we won't save the earth. What an idiot. Bring some green jobs into West Virginia. Yeah, that would be good, wouldn't it? Hey, Joe Manchin. Where does your state rate again on all measures? You know, rate of most poor people, most uneducated, most sick, etc., etc., etc. Where does West Virginia place on that list? Yeah, 48, 49. Why is West Virginia, what is so virtuous about West Virginia that the rest of the world has to suffer because it's not the West Virginia way? All right, what's on the rest of the menu here as I just rant and rant and rant? We don't want to get into Vladimir Putin territory now, do we? Yeah, we have to purify. He's actually talking about rooting out what he calls traitors and bastards, and I think eliminating them. That's why I kind of fear for that pretty news producer. Let alone Griner. What have we heard about her for a while? Just speculation on our part. Think pieces. We haven't heard any actual news about what the hell they're going to do to her and what they have been doing to her. She's a POW. That's the only way to put it. All right, well, as I said, let's get into the rest of the menu here as we begin our day on Metro Shrimp and Grits Thursdays. At the top, Trump emboldened Putin before the war. We all saw that. We all know it. It's good to have it put out there. On the rest of the menu, the state comptroller will take over the majority black town of Mason, Tennessee, just ahead of the Ford electric truck and battery plant being built nearby. They don't want the majority black town of Mason to have any tax revenue from that business. Not without the state of Tennessee, and should I say the white state of Tennessee, getting a bit more of the take. Missouri could make it harder to get out-of-state abortions, as if it's not hard already. And a highway safety study found SUVs and pickups are more likely to hit pedestrians than cars. And that means they're hitting the trucks rather than the cars are hitting pedestrians more. Not that they're hitting pedestrians and cars. After the break, we moved to the chef's table, where the Justice Department accused 5 Chinese operatives of spying on dissidents in the U.S. and for trying to bring down a New York candidate. And Japan's military said it spotted 4 large Russian amphibious warships sailing close to its islands as they traveled west, possibly towards Europe. All that and more on West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit. Are going to forego the usuals at this point of the show, except to remind folks to please do check out the show notes and links diary that I post on Daily Co's about 10 minutes before showtime, and then get that posted up on Twitter at Justice Putnam. All one word. Okay. This first offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, Metro Shrimp and Grits Thursdays, is Out of the Tennessee Lookout by Anita Wadwani. Tennessee Comptroller Jason Mumpower said that he will be taking control of the finances of Mason, Tennessee, a majority black town of about 1,500 people located within 5 miles of the future site Blue Oval City, the Ford electric truck and battery plant that represents one of the largest manufacturing investments in the state's history. I'm sad for the taxpayers of Mason. Actually, I don't think that's how he speaks. I think it's more like this. I am sad for the taxpayers of Mason, he said. We will be working hard to step in and get their finances in shape. Why are their finances so bad? Because of corruption. And we'll find out what kind of corruption and who was corrupted in just a moment. The comptroller's move comes over the objections of Mason's elected officials who have been fighting to maintain control of their town since Mumpower issued an ultimatum last month. Either cede control of Mason's 153-year-old charter or face a financial takeover by the state. Relinquishing its charter would have placed the majority black, majority Democratic town under control of the largely white and Republican-led Tipton County. On Monday night, the town's Board of Aldermen, in an emergency meeting, passed a resolution to keep their charter. It was that decision that the comptroller said led him to act. Mumpower's staff will likely finalize their takeover plans by the end of the week, which seems like it would be today or tomorrow. This has always been a decision for the Mason Board of Aldermen to make, Mumpower said. Really? A financial takeover will give the comptroller veto power over every expense of $100 or more. He's Big Daddy now. Limiting the authority of elected officials to embark on plans already underway to implement beautification projects, improve infrastructure, and hire a codes enforcer. Benefit workforce and other budget cuts may soon follow. Rivers said Tuesday, that's the mayor, that neither she nor any other local official had received any word from Mumpower on the planned takeover. Mason's elected officials will meet as soon as they can to weigh any next steps. How do you nullify democracy? Well, one way is to do this. Rivers said last week that the comptroller's efforts to take control from Mason's duly elected officials is akin to a hostile takeover or a Russian invasion. I would say, coming just as Mason is poised to reap the benefits from billions of dollars in investments in the region from Ford. Mason, which occupies fewer than 2 miles, lies just 4.5 miles from the newly planned Interstate 40 off-ramp that will bring interstate traffic directly to Blue Oval City. Highway 79, which links Blue Oval to Memphis, runs right past Mason's small central district. And CSX Railroad runs directly through the town on a route that will take it straight to the Blue Oval campus. There's just no way Mason will not prosper and grow, Mayor Rivers said. Or she's the vice mayor, I apologize. And now they want to take it away from us. Mumpower has pointed to a 20-year history of fiscal mismanagement by town leaders that has left it with deep debt and crumbling infrastructure. Mason leaders, he said, are ill-prepared to take advantage of growth and new investments to come with Blue Oval City. Why? Because they're black, apparently. Mason's officials have pushed back on Mumpower's assessment. The town ended up in a $500,000 financial hole caused in large part by fraud and embezzlement during prior administrations. Rivers said she and other officials have been working hard to pay off debts accrued under those previous administrations. Rivers and other town officials have questioned why Mumpower or other state officials did not intervene before now. Mason, which still serves as home to descendants of freed slaves, was led by white officials for more than a century. The town's first black mayor, Gwen Kilpatrick, assumed office in 2015 after allegations of fraud and mismanagement led to the resignations of nearly all City Hall officials who were all white. Mason residents have elected black leaders ever since. Mason's current mayor, vice mayor, and 5 of its 6 aldermen are black. And they've been paying off the debts for decades of white mismanagement. And this white power broker, Mumpower, is coming in and saying, oh, these black children, they don't know how to handle the finances. They've had such corruption and historical corruption in the town, all from white officials. And now, at the cusp of them being able to not only pay off these debts accrued by corrupt white officials, but to sit pretty and comfortable and rich. And Mumpower says, not on my watch. Valentine and John Hanna of the Associated Press brings us this next offering here in the Bistro Cafe part of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, Metro Shrimp and Grits Thursdays. First of its kind, Missouri legislation shows that anti-abortion lawmakers in Republican-led states are not likely to stop at banning most abortions within their borders, but also could try to make it harder to go out of state to end pregnancies. A proposal. Yeah, wait. I thought the free movement of people and goods was illegal. I mean, you couldn't clamp down on that. Okay, let's go back to the article. A proposal that could be debated in the legislature as soon as next week seeks to make it illegal to aid or abet abortions outlawed in Missouri, even if they are performed in other states. Like a Texas law passed last year, the bill puts enforcement in the hands of residents who could file lawsuits against those they believe have violated it. Oh, yeah, vigilante justice. The government's not doing as those private citizens. Oh, really? Is this a libertarian paradise that you speak of? State Representative Mary Elizabeth Coleman's bill is aimed at a key frustration for abortion foes. Why do they always have the ladies propose these anti-abortion things? Why? People crossing state lines to avoid restrictions. The bill also targets a network of 90-plus groups across the U.S. that have sprung up specifically to preserve access to abortion because it's the federal law. For now, I guess we have a Supreme Court that doesn't care about that now, do they? The proposal comes as the U.S. Supreme Court is expected to decide by June whether to overturn its 1973 Roe v. Wade decision legalizing abortion, and GOP-led states rush to pass more restrictions in anticipation that the landmark ruling could be tossed out because they want to be first on the block to make sure that women die. Missouri lawmakers in 2019 passed a law banning almost all abortions if Roe v. Wade is overturned. Under Coleman's measure, anything from driving women across state lines for abortion to internet providers allowing access to certain abortion-related websites would be outlawed. What is this, Putin's Russia? She said St. Louis area billboards advertising easier to get abortions in neighboring Illinois would be banned too. Advertise guns, but not abortions. It's trying to evade the laws of the state of Missouri. Well, what about the laws not to bring guns from Illinois into your place? And vice versa. What about the Rittenhouse kid? For a clinic across the state line from St. Louis, 75% of the patients from September 2021 through February were from Missouri, according to the Planned Parenthood affiliate that operates it. In the Kansas City area, the two clinics performing abortions are on the Kansas side. Missouri residents have traditionally accounted for a larger percentage of the abortions performed in Kansas, 42% in 2020, with the latest data available. We are taking Coleman's proposal seriously because I think if we've learned anything from Missouri and also from what's happened in Texas, is that laws that clearly violate an individual's constitutional rights, rights that have been recognized and protected for decades, are now going into effect and impacting whether people can get care, said Emily Wales, president and CEO of the Planned Parenthood affiliate that operates one of those Kansas City clinics. Tom Kreischer of the Associated Press brings us this final offering here in the Bistro Cafe part of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Drivers of bigger vehicles, such as pickup trucks and SUVs, are more likely to hit pedestrians while making turns than drivers of cars, according to a new study. The research released today by the Insurance Institute for Highway Safety points to the increasing popularity of larger vehicles as a possible factor in rising pedestrian deaths on U.S. roads. The authors also question whether wider pillars holding up roofs of larger vehicles make it harder for drivers to spot people walking near the corners of vehicles. The link between these vehicle types and certain common pedestrian crashes points to another way that the increase in SUVs on the roads might be changing the crash picture, said Jessica Cicciano, a study author and vice president of research for the Institute. Although the study mentioned previous research showing blind spots caused by the A-pillars between the windshield and the cabin, the author said more study is needed to link the blind spots to the increased deaths. Over the time period studied, SUV and pickup truck sales have skyrocketed. In 2009, pickup trucks, SUVs, and vans accounted for 47% of all U.S. new vehicle sales. Not all SUVs and pickup trucks have blind spots, though. Compact SUVs, for instance, are now the largest part of the U.S. market. The study also found that the larger vehicles were more likely than cars to be involved in crashes where pedestrians were standing, walking, or running near the edge of the road and away from intersections. Researchers studied federal crash statistics in which pedestrians were killed, as well as all pedestrian crashes reported to police in North Carolina from 2010 through 2018. Rest of the article can be found in the show notes and links diary, so check it out. Why don't we get to our break, and when we get back from that break, we will go through weather from around the world and finish up with the stories that we have curated for you today. You are listening to West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, and we will be right back.
You are listening to netrootsradio.com.
Please hang up and try again.
From a point at sea to the circles of your mind, a new force is at work for planetary transformation. New radio for a new Earth.
This is Scientific American's 60-Second Science. I'm Christopher Intagliata. Chimpanzees can make tools, they display emotions, and they can outfox humans at certain memory games. But chimps also resemble us in another way. They use medicine. They're known to eat tough leaves and bitter plants to purge parasites from their guts. Now researchers have observed chimps applying a never-before-seen type of treatment. They snatch up flying insects and apply them to their wounds. You can see this happening in a video they filmed at Luango National Park in Central Africa.
Susie is sitting up, and then she's catching something from underneath a bush. She's putting it between her lips. She seems to press it, and then she's grabbing the foot of her son with a wound, and then she is applying the insect onto that wound.
Simona Pica is a cognitive biologist at the University of Osnabrück in Germany, part of the team that studies these chimps. She says it's possible the insects have antibacterial or soothing qualities, but this could also be a cultural practice with no medical benefit at all.
Maybe an individual just found out that it's intriguing, then I get a lot of attention, others come, maybe then I get some grooming. And so it just resulted into a social behavior.
After all, Pica points out that humans perform plenty of rituals with no obvious function. Her team reported their findings in the journal Current Biology. And they write that this could be an example of what's called pro-social behavior.
They help each other, and it's not just the mother helping her offspring, and it's not somebody helping somebody to increase their genetic benefits, but it's also individuals who are not related with each other.
As for the insects, the team has not yet identified any remains.
Because it's probably very, very tiny pieces, and we are primatologists, but now we talk to entomologists. And now we have an idea of how to find even smallest remains. And then there are also techniques to then identify the species.
If they do, they'll be able to learn more about what function this practice might have, if any. And perhaps we humans will be able to learn some medicinal tricks from our primate cousins. Thanks for listening. For Scientific American's 60-Second Science, I'm Christopher Intagliata.
Hi, it's Tom. Could we humbly suggest your donation to netrootsradio.com? All we've got to run this 24-hour powerhouse of progressive resistance radio is what comes out of our own wallets. And you are our biggest donor. It doesn't take much, $3, $5. Just go to the bottom of our netrootsradio.com page and hit our secure donate button. Heck, you can even make a recurring contribution. So donate what you'd like at the bottom of our netrootsradio.com's homepage. Because you are our biggest donor. netrootsradio.com. Together, we are Resistance Radio.
Welcome to 60 Second Civics, the daily podcast of the Center for Civic Education. I'm Mark Gage. We are joined by Mina Bose, the Peter S. Calico Chair in Presidential Studies and Executive Dean for Public Policy and Public Service Programs at Hofstra University. Professor Bose, tell us about the democratic norm of separation of powers and checks and balances.
To ensure that no individual or institution would have too much power in the American Republic, the framers of the Constitution designed a system of separation of powers, checks and balances, that sometimes is known as separated institutions sharing powers. What this means, as James Madison wrote in Federalist 51, is that ambition must be made to counteract ambition. So Congress would pass laws and the president would sign or veto them. The judiciary would declare the constitutionality. The president is commander-in-chief, but only Congress has the power to declare war. The president can nominate Supreme Court justices, but they must be confirmed by a majority of the Senate. The president can negotiate treaties, but 2/3 of the Senate must ratify them. Only the House, all bills for raising revenue start in the House of Representatives. These are a few examples of how the institutions share powers and check one another.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mina Bose. That's all for today's episode, 60 Second Civics, where civic education only takes a minute.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1966. This is the day Chicano labor organizer Cesar Chavez started a 340-mile march from Delano to Sacramento, California for the rights of farm workers. The action had actually started the year before, in 1965. Filipino farm workers had gone on strike against grape growers in California. Their demands were better wages and better working conditions. Cesar Chavez's National Farm Workers Association, a precursor to the United Farm Workers, voted to support the strike. Chavez recognized that in order to be successful, the farm workers would need to bring public attention to the struggle. He called for a grape boycott, sending organizers to big cities to coordinate the effort. Back in California, each day the picketing farm workers would choose different fields for their protests. At one of the largest growers in the Delano area, Shinley, striking workers were intentionally sprayed with agricultural poisons. In protest, the National Farm Workers Association organized the 340-mile march to Sacramento. A small group of about 70 farm workers started out on the march. The organizers worked to create a sense of community on the journey. A theater group performed skits about the farm workers' struggles each evening. Over the next 25 days, hundreds of people joined the procession. As the march grew, it garnered media attention. The marchers walked into Sacramento on Easter Sunday morning. A crowd of 10,000 gathered around the Capitol building. The marchers and their supporters erupted into cheers when Chavez announced that Shinley had agreed to recognize the union. Soon, the other large Delano grower also agreed to recognize the workers' union. These were two major victories, but other growers remained unwilling to compromise. It wasn't until 1970 that the 50,000 farm workers in the Delano grape fields won union contracts.
Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show.
Thank you for accompanying us here to the Chef's Table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy Metro Shrimp and Grist Thursdays. We always begin weather from around the world along the banks of the Rogue River, and we will be having a few showers today, but we are going to skip the local weather and get right into weather from around the world, which is brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that crowdsources from around the world. London is 56 degrees and partly cloudy. Paris is 50 degrees and partly cloudy. Rome is 68 and fair. Kyiv is unfortunately 34 degrees and sunny, because when it's sunny, that's when the bombs fall. Kabul is 60 degrees and clear. Hong Kong is 71 and partly cloudy. Tokyo is 53 with heavy rain showers. Sydney, Australia is 73 and cloudy. San Francisco, California is 50 degrees and cloudy. And New York is 48 degrees Fahrenheit with a heavy rain shower. And that is weather from around the world, brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that crowdsources from around the world. Eric Tucker of the Associated Press brings us this first amuse-bouche here at the Chef's Table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, Metro Shrimp and Grist Thursdays. 5 men accused of acting on behalf of the Chinese government have been charged with brazen and wide-ranging schemes to stalk and harass Chinese dissidents in the U.S., including by seeking to derail the election bid of a little-known congressional candidate. The cases underscore what American officials describe as increasingly aggressive efforts by the Chinese government, sometimes involving the use of hired private investigators, to seek out, silence, and threaten pro-democracy activists abroad. Well, wow, they're getting a lot of help doing it here, too, aren't they? The criminal cases filed in federal court in Brooklyn allege long-standing efforts to dig up dirt on dissidents, intimidate them, and stifle their speech. It is not the first time the Justice Department has brought charges for similar conduct. In 2020, prosecutors charged 8 people with working on behalf of the Chinese government in a pressure campaign aimed at coercing a Jersey man who was wanted by Beijing into returning to China to face charges. Another part of the scheme charged by the government alleged a man to be a Chinese government operative sought to undermine the candidacy of a congressional candidate by plotting to locate or even manufacture derogatory information that could prevent him from being elected. The operative is accused of having contacted a private investigator seeking information about the candidate's phone number, address, and vehicle. He later asked the investigator to dig up things from 1989 to now in search of flaws against the candidate to derail his candidacy. And at one point, according to the charging documents, the operative told the private investigator that even violence would be fine too, and suggested that the candidate could be beaten until he cannot run for election.
Je te donne c'est mon amour pour la vie entière. La promesse de me trouver à tes genoux. Aussitôt que tu m'appelles, rester toujours fidèle. C'est tout, c'est tout. Je te donne tous mes printemps, mes étés de mer, mes automnes quand les feuilles tombent partout. Si ce n'est pas une bonne affaire, je te donne tous mes hivers.
Staff at Reuters brings us this final amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Japan's military said today that it spotted 4 large Russian amphibious warships sailing close to its islands as they traveled west, possibly towards Europe. Pictures of the amphibious transports, typically used for landing expeditionary forces ashore, published by Japan's defense ministry, showed what appeared to be military trucks loaded onto the deck of one of the vessels. A Japanese self-defense force maritime patrol first detected the Russian vessels, which can carry dozens of tanks, other military vehicles, and hundreds of troops. Well, that brings us to the end of our broadcast period for the day, but you do know Netroots Radio broadcasts on, and we will meet up tomorrow for Blue Moon Spirits Fridays. So do stay tuned to Netroots Radio all day and all night for all the breaking news as it breaks, and we will meet up here tomorrow, right here in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théâtres, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma fleur sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, qu'il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte Goël. Je voudrais toujours te plaire dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je veux déjeuner par terre, comme au long de golfe clair, t'embrasser les yeux ouverts dans mon jardin d'hiver. Pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver.